If you want to convert MADI to Dante, you have two scenarios you can look at in the Appsys line. You can either go with a Flexiverter Dante, and knowing which MADI port you have in your system, you can pick one of the appropriate aux MADI cards. If you want a little bit more flexibility, you can also go with a Flexiverter MADI, which has SFP and coax MADI I/O on the back, and go with an auxiliary Dante card. So if you have a MADI card in your console, you essentially will go ahead and run that MADI to your aux card. That aux card will be inserted into the back of the Flexiverter Dante, and now you'll have your solution. If you want to do MADI to AES50, you will take either MADI coax, if that's the card you are working with, or MADI optical. In this example, we're using a console with a MADI card. We will go ahead and connect that to the aux MADI coax and put that card in the back of a Flexiverter AES50 to get the format conversion that we want. If you want to do AES50 to Dante, you will grab your Flexiverter AES50, which does 96 by 96 channels of AES50. You will put an auxiliary Dante card in there, which does 64 by 64 over standard Dante. And in a real world, let's say we have a console that has a port that's AES50. Remember, AES50 is port to port or point to point. You will go ahead and run that Ethernet cable directly into the AES50 port on the Flexiverter. You will put an auxiliary Dante card into the back of the Flexiverter to give yourself the AES50 to Dante format conversion that you want. If you want to do Dante to AES3 or ASCBU, you will look at a Flexiverter AES3, which gives you 16 in, 16 out of AES3. You will put an auxiliary Dante card in there, and that's going to be a 16 by 16 solution. You might have a Dante card in your live mixing console. You'll go into the Dante port of the aux Dante card, which is installed into the back of the Flexiverter AES3, and you will run two D-sub cables down to your AES3 amp rack. So this is one situation that you might come across. What if I need more channels? Meaning if I want to do greater channel counts than 16 by 16, because as you can see, the Flexiverter AES3 only gives me 16 by 16. So the way to accomplish this is you're going to go ahead and use a Flexiverter AES3 with an auxiliary Dante, but now you're going to pair these together in a rack kit from Appsys that allows you to put two Flexiverters in the same 1RU space. On the left, we have an AES3 Flexiverter with an auxiliary Dante card installed. On the right, we have an AES3 Flexiverter with an auxiliary Dante installed. But you'll notice on the right, we don't have any conversion going on because we have the same format. We have the same format aux card that we do Flexiverter. So how does this work? Well, we're going to run a FlexiLink cable between them, which is going to give us the ability to run audio between these two devices. And of course, in this particular solution, we're trying to get more AES channels. So on the right, we have 24 channels of AES3. On the left, we have 16 channels of AES3, which gives us a grand total of 40 channels of AES3 to Dante. So you will have Dante coming in on the aux Dante port on this side, and it will convert and allow you to pass the audio over to this Flexiverter out these channels, and also to this Flexiverter's AES port out the back here. So this is a very powerful way to combine Flexiverters with auxiliary cards using the FlexiLink cable to create all kinds of format conversions that you might need. If you want to take a very common question that we get, which is a MIDAS Pro Series console connected to an X32, especially where the Pro Series is running at 96K, how can we do that? So we have a front of house console running at 96K, which is an AES50 console, and we have a monitor console running at 48K because it does not allow us to select 96K as a sample rate. So the Appsys solutions that you will need to accomplish this will be two things. You're going to have to use some form of sample rate conversion between these two devices. And the two things that you will select to do this is a Multiverter MVR64 in conjunction with a Flexiverter AES50. You will have an onboard sample rate converter that will still allow you to do 96K 64 channels to 48K 64 channels. You will run a FlexiLink cable between them to make one complete system out of this. So what does this look like? Well, on the left, we're going to use our AES50 ports. Now, this console, I believe, has 6 AES50 ports. We're going to use 3 of them. Up at the top on the stage, we have a DL251 Pro Series stage box. So we're going to run our point-to-point AES50 cable, which is Ethernet Cat5 and Cat6, to the stage box. We're going to use port 3 and use the internal routing of the Pro Series console to route those inputs to that port and send that over to the Multiverter's AES50 port. We will engage the sample rate converter to convert 96K on that port. We will go send it out the FlexiLink cable to the AES50, which is now at 48K. We will go out of the port on the Flexiverter AES50 into the X32, and now we're doing a very successful 96K to 48K setup. Because the Multiverter has a lot of different formats on board, you have the added flexibility of adding ADAT outputs to, say, personal monitoring system or some other device, and still have MADI that we could go into, say, an RME Fireface and use our playback rig accordingly. If we don't want to use a Fireface, we could also go with something like an RME Digiface Dante and go into the Dante port and have our playback rig in that fashion. If you want to connect a Yamaha series to an X32, we have, in this example, a CL series at 96K front of house, and on the right we have an X32 console stuck at 48K. How can we connect these? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to run our Dante network as we normally would. So we'll use a switch, we'll have our Dante ports connected accordingly, and everything on the left is running at 96K. We will connect that switch to the Dante port on the Multiverter, and everything you see in red is still at 96K. We will engage the internal sample rate converter and route the Dante port to the AES50 port, downsampled to 48K, and go into the AES50 port on our X32. And this is how we can successfully convert, say, a Yamaha Dante console running at 96K to 48K. Now again, the Multiverter has a lot more I/O, so we could go ADAT out into, say, a personal monitoring system. We could go MADI out into a playback rig. In this example, we're using a Fireface UFX Plus. You could also use an RME Digiface Dante and connect one of the Dante ports to that switch and get your playback rig and recording that way. If you want to do AVB to Dante, there's a couple things to keep in mind. While you can use the Flexiverter Dante with an aux AVB, you'll notice the aux AVB gives you an option to be 16 in, 16 out of AVB, 32 in, no out of AVB, no in, and 32 out of AVB. So you have to decide how you want to configure that. Now, this is an easy setup to do. However, if you wanted to go bigger, meaning you wanted to go, say, 128 channels or 64 channels of AVB to Dante, how would you do that? Well, we would use a Flexiverter MADI with an aux Dante, and we're going to show you a system that you can put together using Appsys and RME to make that conversion possible. In this example, we have a Flexiverter MADI with an auxiliary Dante card installed on the left, and on the right we have a Flexiverter MADI with an auxiliary Dante card installed. Now we're going to use this, and we're going to connect each Dante card to the Dante network in this fashion. The Dante card on the left could be channels 1 through 64, and the Dante card on the right is also 64 channels, but it's a different 64 channels, so we'll think of it as channels 65 through 128. Now, on the bottom of this picture, we have an RME 12 mic, which can do 128 channels of MADI to AVB. So we'll go ahead and run the optical MADI on the left in orange to the Flexiverter on the left. That'll be channels 1 through 64. We'll run the coax MADI to the Flexiverter on the right, which will be channels 65 through 128. In this setup, we'll get 128 channels of AVB out of the RME device, and we'll get 128 channels of DANTE out of our DANTE network. This particular RME device additionally gives us a headphone output as well as 12 mic inputs. We could substitute that with something like an AVB tool, still get the same output because the AVB tool will do 128 channels of MADI to AVB the same way, but we'll have 4 microphone inputs and a headphone jack. It also has a couple of balanced analog outputs on the back. If you wanted just the AVB to MADI conversion and maybe some line level IO, you could go with an RME M1610, which is going to give you 16 in, 10 outputs on the line level, but you still get your 128 channels of AVB out of the RME side and 128 channels of DANTE out of the Appsys side. Thank you for watching.